Hi and welcome everyone. Lisa here. Thanks for joining me on my YouTube channel. So today we're going to have a look at the Deco Foil Transfer Gel Duo. I'm going to give you a few little tips to use this to get better results. And we're going to talk about the product and actually use it to stencil some cardstock. So this is the Transfer Gel Duo. It comes in a jar. It's 4 ounces. You can use this two ways. You can use it with heat or without heat. With heat, of course, you're going to be using a laminator or a foiling machine. Pressure from your die cutting machine is how you would use it otherwise. So it is a permanent transfer medium. It dries clear and it stays tacky. Now, I recommend that you let it dry overnight. They recommend that you let it dry for 1 hour or until it's clear. I've only had great results letting it dry overnight. Here are a couple of tools that I use: an offset spatula. Now, I prefer the offset spatula. It's easier to get in the jar to get the product out and then apply it to the stencil. And I have here what is known as a baker's blade or a bench scraper. Now, this is a stencil pal. Some of you probably already have one of these. The problem I found with this stencil pal is because it's plastic, it tends to, over time, the edge of it tends to wear down and it gets fine little lines and grooves in it. And that leaves those same fine lines and grooves in your gel when you remove the excess gel from your stencil. And that does show up in your foiling. So I have found with the metal scraper, I don't have that issue. Everything is nice and smooth and you won't see those lines in your foiling. Now I do have a sample here that I'm going to share with you that I stenciled a while ago, and I used the stencil pal to remove the excess gel from my stencil, and you can see how the lines and the grooves were left behind in the gel, and now it's showing up in the foiling. And when I flip this over, you're really going to be able to see it down in the bottom left corner. And I just wanted you to see, while this is perfectly covered and there's nothing wrong with it, by all means, you can use this. I am just not a big fan of seeing all those tiny little grooves and lines in the foiling. Okay, you guys, so let's talk about how we apply this gel. Now here you can see I have a piece of cardstock laid on top of the stencil. It's upside down, and I've attached purple tape to the back of both of those, and I'm pressing down firmly on both to hold my stencil in place. I'm going to go ahead and flip this over, and we're ready to start stenciling. Now, one thing I want to mention is that I recommend you not use pixie spray when you're using this gel for foiling. And that's because pixie spray is a low tack adhesive. It sometimes leaves a residue behind, and you don't want that residue left behind. It'll pick the foiling up and you'll have foil in places that you don't necessarily want it. Let's talk about applying this gel. I come in with a generous amount of the gel, and I'm going to start in the middle of my stencil, and I'm going to glide the gel over the stencil. I'm not using any pressure with this. I won't be pushing down hard on this. I'm just laying my spatula over the gel and then just gently pulling it across the top of the gel. And because this gel, it's like a mayonnaise consistency, it glides easily over the stencil. And as long as you apply enough and you go over the areas that you're wanting to stencil, you shouldn't have any problems filling the whole stencil in. Now, I have seen where people use too little on their spatula, and then of course, you don't have enough there to cover all the areas. So that's another reason that I want to tell you, go ahead and use a generous amount of this. You're going to scrape the excess off and put it back in the jar, so you're not wasting it. Here, when you're applying it, I wanted to give you a tip. You're going to see me glide the gel up, and notice how I have gel moving in front of the spatula always. That helps to keep everything laying flat. Your stencil won't pull up, and you'll notice you're getting better results. So as you're scraping the excess off, you're going to glide this across. You're not pushing down, no pressure. You're just pulling this lightly across the stencil to remove the excess. And then there we have it. Now, what happens when you push down? is it has a tendency, especially if you're using a plastic scraper, it has a tendency to dig down into the designs where you've laid your gel, and it creates this concave area on your design. And when you go to foil, it's going to skip those areas. You want a very smooth application of this gel so that you get the best foiling results possible. So I'm going to go back over lightly one more time just to make sure I have majority of that gel lifted off of the stencil and put this back in the jar. Now I do want to mention that if for some reason you've done ink blending before you've applied the gel, as you're putting the gel down, you're going to notice it might pick up some of that ink color. You don't want to put that back in your pot, so you're going to want to discard that. Here's my results for my stenciling, and with these tips and tricks that I've just shared with you, I get perfect results every time. So I have my cardstock here that I've stenciled with the Duo Gel. And I also have some other things here we're going to talk a little bit about. So I wanted to try out a piece of acetate. Now I know you can already buy acetate toner sheets, but what if I want a different design? This is a great way for me to create my own clear pieces with this Duo Gel. I went ahead and I stenciled this, let it dry overnight, and now I'm going to apply some green to this. This is a satin lime color that I'm using from Therm. It's absolutely gorgeous. With the ink machine, you have the option to put it on 0, which is a no heat setting. And because this gel can be used with heat or without heat, I can still run this through my machine on a 0 setting with no heat and not have to worry about melting this acetate. Here's just regular cardstock, and I stenciled this honeycomb design from a stencil from Whimsy stamps just onto white cardstock, and you saw I got amazing results with that. This is actually yupo paper, and I did some alcohol blending on this months ago, and I wasn't crazy about it. And I just held on to the yupo paper, and I'm glad I did because it's letting me show you that you can, in fact, do your alcohol inks, your blending on yupo paper, let it dry, and then you can stencil over it and run it through your machine on a no heat setting and go ahead and foil your alcohol ink blended background. So this is just a thin white yupo paper right here. Now remember, for anything that's plastic, you don't want to apply heat to it. It's going to cause it to melt and warp, and it's just going to be a mess. So no heat on the plastic. So let's have a look at this acetate. Remember, we kept this ink machine on the 0 setting, and we have these amazing results. I absolutely love the way this acetate turned out. It is so pretty. So here you can have a look at it and see how amazing the design turned out. So I bumped the heat up on my ink machine to a 3, and I'm going to go ahead and run the cardstock through the ink machine. Now I went ahead and dusted off the back of that foil, laid it on top of that cardstock so I could send it on through in that carrier sheet. Once I get this in, I want to talk to you about some things that I have played around with watercolor paper. I actually foiled it first and then watercolored over it, and it did great. I also have done yupo paper and the black yupo paper as well. So with the black yupo paper, you have to use a white ink first and then apply the alcohol inks over it. So I actually foiled this piece first so that I could see how the inks would react with the foiling, and it seemed to do fine. Here we have our stenciled and foiled background that we did. You can see how gorgeous that foiling is, and I'm going to share a card with you now that I created using that foiling and the acetate with the green foil on it. I feel like this stencil has a very retro feel, so I felt like the martini glasses with the birthday sentiment would be perfect with this. I have the products that I used linked below in the description box, plus you can hop over to my website and check out the blog post on this. Now, I hope you found this video helpful and informative. If you did, be sure you subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell. And as always, please know how much I appreciate you. And until next time, take care.